Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. You are joining us for part 2 of our discussion on One Foot in the Grave. If you haven't listened to the last episode, probably should go back because we're right in the middle of things. We're looking at Series 3, Episode 6 in detail, but we're also looking at the show as a whole, and we've already talked about what the actors and the writer did before, so that's all in the last episode. So now we're going straight into the middle of the discussion. We're in the middle of the episode, and we're going to go on to talk about what happened after the show. So do go back if you haven't listened to the first part, and for everyone else, enjoy. So we have the skip punchline. Mm-hmm. That's that story ended. We're never going to mention the skip again. We're never going to mention that car again. So that's that done. Don't worry about that. We've gone on to another plot now, and that plot is they're going to a show with Mrs. Warboys and Cousin Wilf. Now, obviously, we've set that up, but essentially it's like a new plot starting 10 minutes into the episode. And then we have the old switcheroo where Mrs. Warboys isn't going with them. Cousin Wilf goes upstairs just as they arrive. The window cleaner wanders out of the garage. He's been there for all night. He's
unconscious.
Yeah.
24 hours.
And he's dazed. And again, this is about as sort of silly, cartoony sitcom as it gets. The fact that someone has been unconscious in a garage all night is kind of not quite realistic. But it just about tracks. Mm-hmm. And again, that's kind of where One Foot in the Grave finds its limit. And again, just to mention the business again, you'll notice when the fake Wilf, the window cleaner, comes out, Margaret sort of finds him and she picks up the tie that has been left because Cousin Wilf decided he wasn't wearing
a minute
that tie.
earlier, yeah.
And that
was Wilf's excuse to go upstairs. So
exactly.
Here is the tie.
It all works. Yeah. It all ties in, but she's putting a tie on him, which is a kind of a nice, she's taking care of him kind of moment. Mm-hmm. She's trying to make him look a bit more presentable. Mm-hmm. But also, it's business, because if she wasn't doing that, she'd just be stood talking to him. And it's. I know that there was like an hour-long conversation about how to make that work somewhere along the lines. And once I picked up on it, I couldn't stop seeing it. But I really like it. I
really like you pointed it out because it's not something I really picked up on. But you are quite correct. That tie, it served two purposes. Definitely, it's sort of discarded. Oh, Wilf needs to go upstairs for a new tie, and you think, oh, that was his excuse to go upstairs, but it comes back. Very, very good. Yes, very good.
Mm. So then they go off to the BBC to watch an episode of a sitcom being filmed. Sort of slightly meta thing.
A little bit of an in-joke there, yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of putting it in a place in the 90s, the queue that they see that's really busy is for the Generation game. Mm-hmm. So that dates it.
Yeah. The remake of the Generation game, though.
Oh, yeah, good old Generation game, eh?
Yeah.
They don't make them like that anymore, thankfully.
They pretty do.
Right, so then we have this plot with the fake Wilf, and he's confused. They think he's the real Wilf. There's a bit of shenanigans at the TV centre, and they're carrying him back to the car and stuff like that. The fact that the show they've gone to see,
if the guy had passed out, someone would be helping.
That's the BBC for you. They go back to the house. They bring him in, lay him on the settee, and then Cousin Wilf walks in and's like, "Oh, who are you? What's going on?" And that's it. Yeah. He basically says, "I'm Wilf," and they go, "What? Who's he then?" Bit of a pause, double take, end of scene. And never mentioned again.
We never come back to the window cleaner. We've no idea what happens to him.
And that is again very typical of the show. That to say how often Victor kind of blows his top and he doesn't believe things. They underplay a lot. He really underreacts to so much. Like, he's so gobsmacked that he just kind of he does a classic double take. His jaws drops wide open. And then it just cuts away because in David Renwick's writing, you don't have to have consequences. It's fine. You just move on to another plot line that you set up earlier.
So, we go to Victor working at his new job.
Now, if I was going to say to you, right, I've got a One Foot in the Grave episode. Victor gets a job as a doorman. You think, right, I can see that being an episode. No, it's 5-minute sketch at the end of something else that was completely unrelated to it.
Yes.
It is totally unconnected. Apart from, like, they mention casually, oh, starting a job on Monday. Well, nice, that's going to be good. Like, which has obviously just been put in later.
And there's the payoff with the fleas as well.
Which is basically nothing. Like
the payoff is just a small topper on the main joke, isn't it?
Yeah,
the big punchline is, there's the posh geezer giving him a hard time, and he pulls his toupee off and throws it down the drain. That gets a massive laugh, and then the woman discovers she's got fleas in her fur coat, which is a topper. But
to say how much effort they went to set it up with him scratching for the entire
his ankle
show.
3 times. Chekhov's fleas.
But it's like, this could so easily be a full episode, or certainly the bulk of the episode, with maybe a subplot running somewhere else. Victor gets a job and he's having a hard time because the toffs are messing him about, and he takes it and he takes it and he takes it and then finally snaps and he does it. But because you're condensing it into one 5-minute sketch, it doesn't quite work as well. It just doesn't have time to breathe. You really have to hammer home with the disabled guy, like, struggling to get out of the car. Yeah. Like, really in a quite cheesy...
The guy that he loses his rag with is a colossal arsehole. Like, it's perfectly reasonable for Victor to tell him to get stuffed. And that goes back to what we were saying before about the sympathy with the character. The way he reacts is extreme. But in that example, we'd have all liked to tell that geezer to stick it.
But you wouldn't. And this is an unusual scene in that, like I say, really the consequences that Victor reaps are from his confrontational attitude. This is slightly different, and we're seeing him in a different context because it's his job. It's his job to serve these toffs and basically take whatever they want to throw at him. And so to do it in that position with a very knowing full well, this job is gone. I'm not doing this job anymore.
Yeah.
It is slightly different to what we usually see. But because it's just thrown away in this sketch, we never get much sense of that. And this brings up a sort of further question as to Victor Meldrew's situation in general. So in episode 1, the first opening scene, we set up the character.
We see him get made redundant. Well, early retirement.
Yeah, exactly. He's 60 years old. So it's early retirement. He's a security guard, and they replace him with a box, that people punch a number into it, which is obviously a little bit of a kind of technology taking over kind of gag. But, true for a lot of people, perhaps not quite that succinctly, but, people were losing jobs because of, machinery taking over your job. Yeah. And because of his age, he's obviously struggling to find a new job. But throughout the show, we see him working every now and then, and it's usually just a one-episode thing. Oh, I've got a job doing this. Oh, no, it's gone wrong. I've been fired. Oh, no, this silly thing happened. Never holds down a job very long. But we never get a sense that he needs a job. He wants a job because he wants to feel useful, and he wants something to do with his time. Never get a sense that he needs money, which does show in this episode that he throws this job away. He doesn't need to stay in a job, which obviously creates conflict if you have that. If you have a character who is in a situation where they're not liking it, but they have to be there. Obviously, that's set up for most sitcoms,
But in that first episode, and this is perhaps a broader subject to talk about, the tragedy element of it. In that first episode, he's a broken man when he loses his job. That's his whole purpose gone. And that doesn't translate to this, halfway through series 3, where he's quite happy to easy come, easy go with the job.
The fact that he's, retired or forced retired, it's really just a setup to mean he's got a lot of time on his hands to just get into spats with people. In those early episodes, it is about him finding purpose as well. Like, he's lost his purpose.
1 foot in the grave. That, he's on his way to the grave. He needs to create purpose in his life. And without work, that's an existential question for the 20th century male psyche, isn't it? Without work, what are we?
Mm. And I think, David Renwick's dad had just retired when he kind of wrote this character. I think there was kind of a lot of influence coming from that. I mean, I've seen it with my own dad when he retired. It was just very much a loss of purpose all of a sudden. Like, when you're spending 12 hours a day doing a job, all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
What the hell do you do with yourself? Even if you're ready to retire and you're sick of it, it's suddenly you've got that time to kill. And I think that's a great setup. But we do kind of quite quickly lose that need for a job. But it raised the question for me, I wondered what you thought of this, about class. Specifically, what class are Victor and Margaret?
Well, like you said, they're financially secure and they've got a nice house in the suburbs, and they've got that middle class flavour to them, that good life type thing. But he was a security guard.
Yeah, exactly.
He can't have been on a massive wage his whole life.
And
but,
and maybe... Margaret works in a florist shop at first, like that's her job. So again, not like she's not a solicitor or something. She's just earning a pretty regular wage.
They're boomers, aren't they? They bought their house early on.
Yeah,
reap the rewards.
Yeah, and now they tell us,
looking down on us, saying we need to work harder. Now they've destroyed the planet for us. I'm 44. I don't know what I'm on about.
But yeah, so it's an interesting one, and again, I think this helps the kind of timeless nature of it. It doesn't feel stuck in a class system that perhaps no longer exists. I think, in fact, 1990 is perhaps the point when the class structure as we know it was disintegrating. It was throughout the 80s, The working classes were becoming non-working classes, the unemployed classes.
The Thatcher years, the people buying their council houses, and there was an explosion in house values. So yes, if you were a property owner, then suddenly the class structure and relative wealth no longer went hand in hand.
I don't think this program is trying to say anything about that. I think it's just set them up in a position where, okay, we're not creating a need that they have to make money or anything.
I think that's right. I think you just said earlier about him, like, as I say, in that first episode, he's a broken man when he loses his job, and then it's all right. Like you say, it's just a setup. It's just a setup to create this scenario in which they've got time. They've got time on their hands. There's, he doesn't have a job. He doesn't need a job. He can just pick fights with Angus Deaton.
Yeah. But I think it is slightly odd because we see him as a security guard, but then, I don't know, the way we see him act and the way his kind of general behaviour and personality doesn't quite tally with that working class, like, I've been a security guard for 30 years kind of thing. He's quite an intellectual. He's very creative. And I don't want to say, like, security guards are just, mindless, like, whatever. But it is a job that is not particularly conducive to creativity or mental stimulation. So perhaps the solution to that is he finds stimulation outside of work or whatever. But you know what I mean? I think if you were just going to write a character who has been a security guard his whole life, he would come across as more of a working class bloke, and that's not how Victor Meldrew comes across. Like, if you just saw these characters without seeing that first episode, you'd assume he'd been like a middle management bank clerk, or, like kind of that.
It's the good life, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I'm not quite sure if there's a point in there or not. I don't think there is, really. I think it's just Renwick had a setup and then it just wrote whatever he wanted.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. And it goes back to this point that you've made a couple of times about he's a sketch writer. He's created as broad and as blank a canvas as he can in order to be able to paint scenarios on it. So the characters are there and they are fixed in time, and there are certain things about them that are fixed, but they're not restricted in the experiences that they can have and their reactions to those experiences.
Yeah.
And that's why we're struggling to pin it down, I think.
So that's the end of the episode that we're specifically looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And in this episode, we see Mrs. Warboys, who's one of the other regular characters. Mm-hmm. And, she's a nice little foil for Victor particularly.
Yeah.
But, you get a good view of her in this scene. She's a little bit ditzy, not kind of stupid, but she's just sort of existing. And
enough for Victor to roll his eyes at.
Yeah.
But without being an antagonist.
Yeah, exactly. And they use her very nicely as just being the neighbour. She can come in and set up a plot line, with some gossip or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a handy character to have around. But there are a few other regular characters who we've kind of briefly mentioned, but aren't in this episode. So I think it'd be nice to touch on them as well.
Yeah, there's some recurring characters, aren't there? And it was interesting watching some of the episodes. I don't know, obviously we've talked about Angus Deaton, Patrick and Pippa next door. And in my memory, they were, regulars, and they were sort of not quite in every episode, but, in a lot of episodes. And they're not, are they? They're not at all. They're only in a few.
No, they're in about a third, I would guess. Let me think. There's 42 episodes. I'll quickly look this up. They are in 14 episodes. So that's exactly a third. And then we've got Nick Swaney, who is the neighbour. He's in 15 episodes, so about the same.
So we watched the first episode, and Nick Swaney's in that first episode, he's like some sort of social worker who works with old people, and so Victor gets, he's just retired and he gets lumped in with all these frail old pensioners. which great comedy ensues. But clearly, in my memory, Nick's the neighbour, but he's not in that first episode. So when does he? Is that when the house burns down and they have to go and live somewhere else?
They move to a new house in the second series, and their new neighbour is him, and it's the same actor but also the same character. He was brought in. Obviously, that wasn't planned. He was brought in as that one-off character, and they enjoyed it enough that they went, you know what? We need a new neighbour. Let's have this kind of little busybody, kind of annoying character. So let's talk about him first. Nick Sweeney, the neighbour, played by Owen Brenman.
He's one of those people that you sort of see popping up in one episode of this, and in the background of that. Yeah,
and that's what he did. Apparently, he's been on Doctors for many years, like, been a regular on that, which obviously is a bit out of my kind of sphere.
That's like a daytime soap, is it?
Yeah. But yeah, there's Owen Brenman and Angus Deaton, previous to One Foot in the Grave, both worked on Alexi Sale's Stuff.
Yes.
Which was an Alexi Sale-based sketch show, which David Renwick was a writer for.
Was he? Okay, well, I loved Alexi Sale Stuff. I was a big fan of Alexi Sale, and, going back to the early 80s, he was one of the pioneers of alternative comedy. So when he launched that sketch show, Stuff... how old was I? Well, I would have been sort of 14 or 15. But to me at that point, it was a really inventive and interesting and really funny sketch show. I loved it.
That was like Renwick and Marshall were writers for that show, amongst other things, yeah. So David Renwick had worked with Owen Brenman before, and I think cast him on that basis. I think he was involved in going, I know a guy for this part, and then developed it into this full-blown character. I think the Nick Sweeney character is often the figure of pathos in the show because
he's a
pathetic character, basically. Yeah, he lives with his mum. Yeah. His sort of disabled mother, so he's her carer. We never see her. It's kind of a bit of an in-joke that she's always in the house, we never see her. In the later episode, like right in one of the very later episodes, he really confronts this idea that, like, what have I done with my life? I'm 45 or whatever, and I'm not married. I've just sort of spent my entire time looking after my mum. I do nice things around the community. I help people, but who's gonna look after me?
Bit of a shock to the system, something like that. As if, I don't know, someone was taunting me with a glimpse of the man I should have been. It's hard to imagine Skip Hoberman living at home with his mother for 40 years, running Tom Bowlers. Like an overgrown Boy Scout.
Sorry, Alan, how is that resolved then? Because I don't remember that.
He just sort of gets on with it. I don't think there's any real resolution.
It's not resolved.
It's just a moment. This might be a good time to bring up another little thing, a little quirk of David Renwick's writing, which I don't particularly care for. He loves dark comedy. He loves to go tragic. He loves dropping these very, very dark moments. And I think he thinks that they're very well woven in to the thing, and it's well plotted and structured. And again, I think that's perhaps his weakness, structure. To take a dark subject and make it funny, yes, he does do that, but it always feels a bit clunky to me.
Can I give you an example? In that first episode where Victor, through a series of mishaps, ends up buried up to his neck in the garden.
Right, that's not the first episode. That is episode 1 of series 4, I think.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, yes. You're absolutely right. It's The Pit and the Pendulum.
It's a classic.
I've mixed them up, sorry, but you're right. So, yes, it's the first episode of series 4. And, yes, through a series of scrapes, Victor ends up in the garden, buried up to his neck, and he's got a plant pot on his head, and Angus Deaton finds him, and hilarity ensues. And we're getting these punchlines and these payoffs. And then Annette Crosby comes out and says, my mum's just died.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you just said, because it was this handbrake turn and this darkness and this tragedy, but it didn't fit. It wasn't making light of that situation. Yeah. It was just like, okay, fun's over. This is real life. Smack.
Yeah, and that is something that happens time and time again in this show. And, in that episode, we set up the mother beforehand, and it has the whole answer machine thing that kind of pays off.
Yeah.
But also, the mother has been an established character. We've never seen her, but, she goes and looks after her mother every once in a while. It's been there. And I think perhaps the idea is, sometimes people die and it comes out of nowhere. So that's how we're tackling it. And I understand that, but it doesn't mean it works. And like tonally, There are these huge, like you say, handbrake turns. And I think that happens quite a lot in the show in general.
It's the speed of the change of tone. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because it's not set up. Yes, we have set up the answer machine, like you say. But it's a really, really funny scene. It's punchline, smash. And it just doesn't work. It's not appropriate.
So I think that's quite common, and I think that is a failing, frankly, of David Remakes' writing, even though, I do think it's a good show. But I'd like to give you an example of when it does work. And again, it's from an episode where he's writing in real time. So in the episode, which I think is called Timeless Time, it's the one where they're in bed, they can't sleep, and, all sorts of things are happening. This is going off there. Victor has to go outside because the car alarm's gone off, and he comes back, blah, blah, blah. And then Victor says something that obviously triggers Margaret to think about their son. And then they just have this little conversation. Well, it's not even a conversation. It's essentially Annette Crosby monologuing.
I was thinking about him just this morning, funnily enough. Running into Glynis outside the post office with Michael. She had him just 4 days before, if you remember. She was coming out of hospital just as I was going in. He's still working for that insurance company. They're talking about moving him to his own branch, up north somewhere. She'll miss him. She never had any others. I always think of Stuart when I see him.
And this is out of nowhere. This is like series 2 or whatever. Obviously, they've got no kids. Or rather, there's certainly no evidence of any family. And it's not been mentioned. And all of a sudden, you get this mention of they've obviously had a son, and he's dead. And you certainly get the impression that he didn't live long at all. Like, it could have been a stillborn. Like, that's how much there's so little history to this child, And they obviously never had any further kids. Which is quite a big thing, obviously to the characters, but in terms of a story setup, the fact that they don't have kids to deal with, they've got more disposable income because of that. They've got more time to just do what they want because of that. But also, they've got each other because of that, and they really have to stick with each other.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite an important thing that you don't have to bring up, frankly. But they do it very nicely. Annette Crosby absolutely nails it.
I bet.
And they undercut it with just a little joke to get us out of it. And then they go on with something else. It works in that. It's a bit of a shift, but it's nice. It gives us some character depth that never gets mentioned again. But for someone who's watching the whole thing going through, it's just a nice bit of character stuff. And I like that. But I think so often it's not that well handled. And it just does come like a bit of a gear change all of a sudden. But there you go. Renwick loves that kind of tragedy. Also looks dark comedy. Like there's so much animal death in this show. Like always accidental, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
But there is a lot of animal death in the show. Like it's just like he's pushing these buttons at like dark comedy. Oh yeah, that's going to.
I seem to remember there being some controversy about that at the time. Obviously, no one supposed they were killing these animals for real, but I remember that being a thing about One Foot in the Grave. Yeah, he's got a bit of a problem with animals. What about, just while we're talking about ancillary characters, let's talk about Patrick and Pippa then. Because Angus Deaton and Janine Davitsky are, as I say, they're only in 14 episodes, but to me they felt like the next most important characters.
Definitely, yeah. They turn up in series 2. It's about episode 3 or something. So the Meldrews are in their new home, and they turn up, and the whole kind of plot of the episode is that this couple have turned up. Victor and Margaret think, "Oh God, we don't know them. Why? I don't recognise them. We must know them. They've come to stay because they've turned up with suitcases." Yeah. And then, obviously, as you go on, it transpires they're the neighbours, but because they've been away for a month on holiday since Victor and Margaret moved in. Mm-hmm. Like they've got suitcases because they've just come back. Anyway, it's hilarious, and that sets up this conflict between the characters that Patrick and Pippa are this kind of a normal couple just trying to go about their business, and this madman has moved in next door, and it always plays like we understand what Victor's doing and why and how things have happened. But Patrick never sees the background. He just sees the consequences. And I think that's really nice... But it ruins
Patrick's life, doesn't it? This is what's interesting, because as we talked about Victor earlier, the world happens to him and he's supernaturally unlucky, but the way he reacts doesn't help. And that's exactly what happens to Patrick. Victor Meldrew is happening to him, but he reacts really badly and he makes things worse. And he's the mirror image, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. To the point where in the very last series, Angus Deaton's character, he looks in the mirror and it kind of morphs into Victor Meldrew, and he's like, "Oh my god,
that's very on the nose, isn't it?"
I'm becoming him, yeah. So as they go along, he becomes more and more like him, I suppose, which is nice. I like that. I don't think it never quite gets to the point where they find common ground, which is a shame. I think it's quite nice. There's one specific episode where they kind of they're forced together and they have to deal with each other, and to some point they kind of find a mutual respect, but ultimately it still all kind of falls apart in the end. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting casting though. I mean, Angus Deaton, of all the things he is, I don't think anyone's ever accused him of being an actor.
But he was a sketch comedian. He was in Alexis Sales stuff, as you mentioned earlier. And then he was in a program called KYTV, which it had originally been called Radioactive on the radio, and they made it into the TV thing. And it was I seem to remember KYTV was kind of a satire of the then new cable channels and satellite channels. So it was just parodies of crap television programs.
Right, yeah.
So very much a sketch comedian. And as far as I'm aware, he wrote that as well. He was, it was an ensemble cast and writing team.
I heard him being interviewed, and he basically said that One Foot in the Grave was the first thing he'd ever been hired on as an actor, that he wasn't kind of involved in writing. And so he had to really kind of let go and just act, just be the actor and do the lines he's given. Yeah, look, he's not a good actor, okay? Let's deal with that. But he's got a very specific style. He's extremely deadpan. I think it works.
I think he's perfectly good at playing that character. And that might be the only character he can do. But who cares? In the context of one program, that's what he's doing. So that's fine.
It never quite fits for me. The character never quite fits in the tone. I think you could put another actor in there and it would work better. Frankly, I do think that. With exactly the same material and everything. He does bring a unique energy to it that is that style. And, of course, Janine Davitsky plays his wife. She is, again, she's like the Margaret equivalent. Like, she's the normal one. Yeah, exactly.
One. If we're saying that Patrick is like Victor, then yes, Pippa is so much like Margaret.
And throughout, when Patrick and Victor are fighting, the two wives are always perfectly friendly with each other, and they sort of work behind the scenes to try and make things up and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, Janine Davitsky, of course, she was at this same time she got the job in Waiting for God, in which she plays a very similar character. Yes. She has quite a specific casting type, I think. But she was in Abigail's Party. That was her breakthrough role.
Was, blimey, yes. You see, that Abigail's Party, even for me, is a little before my time, but I have seen it.
1977 it was,
yeah.
But that was her breakthrough on stage, and then they did a TV version of it. And she's
a bit like Owen Brenman. She's one of those people that you see popping up in lots of things in the background and in supporting roles. Shall we talk about the catchphrase? What I want to talk about is the fact that the thing that people remember is the catchphrase. If you say One Foot in the Grave, that is the first thing they will say.
God almighty. Look what it is. It's that actor. Who? Your man from One Foot in the Grave, the I don't believe it man. Oh, wow.
But, having watched several episodes of this recently, the running theme for me is visual gags.
Mm.
A lot of the punchlines are visual. We talked about the car in the skip. We talked about him being buried up to his neck in the garden.
Yeah.
There's a tree planted in the toilet. A lamppost falls through the window. He picks the dog up as a phone. These are visual jokes. So why do people remember it as a catchphrase-led sitcom?
I don't know if it's do people think of it as... They remember that line. But to be honest, even that, like, he says it, he does say it, but then so often it'll be like some variation of it. It's not like he nails that catchphrase. Like he'll say, unbloody believable or something like that. Like he will... Variations on a kind of exasperation and frustration.
Exasperation, yeah. It's just verbalised exasperation. That's not a great catchphrase. One foot in the grave. Verbalised exasperation.
And they do a very nice job, I think, of not just hitting that too hard. And obviously it's cursed his life since.
That's my point. It's interesting to me that it has. I wonder if that's Father Ted's fault. I wonder if it was... Obviously it was a thing, otherwise they wouldn't have made the joke. But I wonder if it was after that episode it became more of a thing.
I don't know, maybe.
I'll tell you what we haven't talked about. Before we sum up, it's probably worth talking about the theme tune and titles.
They say I might as well face the truth, but I am just too long in the tooth. So
perhaps as well known as the show itself, really. A standout moment.
And I'm gonna show my hand and say, I don't like it.
Eric Idle is very difficult to like, in my experience.
Yeah, I think that's... Well, okay, let's put all the cards on the table here. I think Always Look on the Bright Side of Life was funny the first couple of times I heard it. When I was 12. And now I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a silly film, a silly song. But that my general attitude towards comedy songs is pretty negative. I find them quite teeth-gratingly awkward. So it's not my thing. But yeah, the song itself is... Well, how many episodes have I just watched this week? 4, maybe 5? I'm so sick of that theme tune. I've heard it.
Oh, mate,
10
I
times.
can't tell you how many times I've heard it. I've started skipping through it, like at the beginning of the episode.
Really, enough.
But yeah, it's timeless. It's not got a really kind of 90s sound to it, I guess.
No, that's true.
It's in that sense,
1960s Cambridge University sound to it.
It's disconnected, but the fact that the credits as well are not like clips from the show or anything like that, that's quite unusual. It's obviously it's an old tortoise, isn't it? That's One Foot in the Grave.
The visuals are odd. Yes, it's One Foot in the Grave. You associate it with it because it was the theme, the titles. But apart from that, why is it? Victor's not a tortoise. It's not a good metaphor.
But it's just an old creature that's just lumbering about. I think that's a general idea.
Victor doesn't lumber. He doesn't lumber. I reject the metaphor.
Look, they had it in the BBC archives. It was free. That's what it was. But yeah, you're right. It's a very unusual set of credits. Both the song and the fact that they use those visuals really does jump out as unusual for sitcom. And to be honest with you, I can't tell you what the story there is. I don't know if they just sort of went to Eric Idle and went, "Can you do a song for us?" Was he just jobbing around, like, trying to earn some money, like doing whatever he could?
Eric Idle doing in 1990, yeah.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, it's been a while since the last Python film.
So I honestly don't know the story behind any of that, but it's stood the test of time. People remember it.
That's true. People are idiots, of course.
I did, of course, send you the extended version with a music video that was released.
Oh, man. I wondered if we were going to talk about this. We're going to we have to put a link to this because it has to be seen to be believed.
It was amazing.
Explain what it is, Alan.
So this was to tie in with that feature-length Christmas special they did, One Foot in the Algarve, and it's an extended version of the song. So there's a couple of different verses with slightly different lyrics, and then there's this kind of awful, like, Casio keyboard dance beat, like, prefix under it sometimes. That, like, it feels like it's trying to be a 90s dance song.
Hello! 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 Oh, hell! I can't hear myself think! Stop it! Will you turn off that ruddy racket? I don't believe it.
They tell me I am well past my prime. The landlord in the sky's calling time. But there's one thing that he ought to...
It reminded me of when they changed the theme tune. Oh, no, they didn't change the theme tune. They updated the theme tune to Blue Peter.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, what is this? Why did they need to mess with that? And they make it of its time. They modernise it, which just means you are anchoring it forever in 1993.
Also, the video is Eric Idle just, fanning around in LA or wherever he was living at the time. And they've got Richard Wilson in a studio for, I would guess, 45 minutes to just do some bits for it.
Yeah.
And like I've heard him talk about it, he said like, "Oh, they told me it was going to be Christmas #1. They promised me." It was a novelty record.
Sales-wise?
I don't think it did very well. But that episode, One Foot in the Algarve, was the highest ratings the show ever got, about 20 million.
What was it, like a Christmas night thing?
Yeah, I think it was Boxing Day.
Yeah, so that makes a big
90-minute, feature-length special.
But it was very popular. We haven't really talked about One Foot in the Grave's popularity, but at the very beginning, I said my memory of it was that it was a mainstream BBC sitcom that has somehow attained this cult status. So is that my memory playing tricks, or am I right? Was it a primetime top audience sitcom?
Yeah, it pulled in serious figures. I think it appealed to a large audience base. It's not for the kids. It's not for even though it's older characters, it doesn't work as in it's for old people. So yeah, it had a huge draw. The fact that it's stood the test of time is perhaps the more interesting element of that. That 20 years later, people still remember it as one of the great sitcoms because it was well loved. But I don't know, it doesn't feel like it was that standout one, like an Only Fools and Horses or whatever. But
I think a comparison, we've done an episode on Bread, and Bread was very much that prime time, designed to be number one in the ratings, and was number one in the ratings. And it is remembered as just another mainstream sitcom. Whereas One Foot in the Grave has that cult status, which is unusual for something that was so popular.
But like you said, Bread is entirely rooted in the 80s. Like you watch Bread and it is dated.
That's perhaps, yeah. So as you were saying earlier, One Foot in the Grave isn't dated and is timeless, and perhaps that's helped it survive.
I think so, yeah. Because Only Fools and Horses is certainly very 80s, but perhaps not quite in the same way. I mean, I haven't got an answer really. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, it certainly has a legacy.
So yeah, what happened after the series finished?
Well, probably worth talking actually about the end of the series, the very last episode. They knew they were going to end it, and they chose to kill off Victor Meldrew.
I remember that.
Make sure it never came
back. A big deal. Front page.
Yeah,
news.
and that is again very David Renwick. Kill the character. That's a big emotional impact. And it's interesting that episode it wasn't a special. It was just episode 6 of this series that they did, but they knew the way they were going with it. But there's no build up to it. It's not like he's ill or anything. He gets hit by a car. That episode starts with Margaret on the phone to someone going, "Look, I'm afraid we can't help you. My husband's dead." Cut to a month earlier, and then we see the story of how he died. So they don't try and pull it out as a surprise. They set it up in the episode itself. I think it was all over the news anyway that it was going to happen.
That's interesting though. Why, from a dramatic point of view, why make that decision? Do they sort of do comedy like the first 10 minutes of Casualty? He's in lots of risky situations throughout the episode.
No, not at all. I'd like to give them benefit of doubt and think it was just cheap to just kill him off just out of nowhere. But that's because that's what happens. He gets hit by a car. It's like it comes out of nowhere. And so that's too much of an impact, perhaps, and it just you need to be able to get your audience ready for that. Especially as then you're only going to have like 15 minutes to deal with it before you never see this character again.
Yeah.
And it plays very well. It sort of ends with this ambiguous ending. You're not sure how Margaret's dealt with the person who is responsible for her husband's death. And, it's a sort of suitable end, I think. And I do like it when they know there's a definitive end and they write it in. It feels like you've got a conclusion then. But in the post-series world, well, first of all, in actual direct relation, Richard Wilson did kind of attempt to do a one-man show.
Really?
In 2016. So he did like a one-off thing where the episode, The Trial, where it's just him on his own, the character on his own, they basically did that on stage. And then he did like a Q&A thing afterwards. It was a one-off thing. I'm not sure exactly why, but it went well. And so they decided to do a run basically of that, like a little one-man show at the Edinburgh Fringe. And this is in 2016. So this is 16 years after the show.
This is very recent, yeah.
And he had a heart attack like the week before it was supposed to happen, so it never happened. Basically, he was already 80 years old then. It's I'm not sure exactly how they played it. If they tried to make it feel like he was older, or if they just did it as it was. I think it still worked as is. But that's the only thing that's kind of come out of it directly. I've read something that David Renwick is publishing a novel this year called One Foot in the Grave and Counting. And I don't have any further information apart from that it's a novel.
I was going to ask about Renwick and what, obviously, we've discussed Jonathan Creek, which is what he did next. Has he done anything since then? It feels like Jonathan Creek was quite a long time ago.
Well, Jonathan Creek's another thing. It started in 97, but the most recent special they did was 2 years ago or something.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
He churns out a couple of episodes every few years.
I must confess, I've never seen Jonathan Creek. It's not something I watched, but...
Oh, it is very good. Actually, it's very weird and kind of hit and miss, but there's some great stuff in there. It makes you keep watching. The first ones with Caroline Quentin are very good. Yeah, that was his big success after this. And that was a huge show as well. But then, he's just doing sporadic things. He did, the one other major thing he did was a show called Love Soup.
It was Tamsin Gregg, wasn't it?
That is correct. It was Tamsin Gregg.
Yeah.
And in my research for this, I bought Love Soup on DVD. I was going to watch it. I thought, I'll give that a go and see how it feels. I watched one episode and gave up. But
Excellent.
it's not a sitcom, which is kind of what I was thinking. I mean, first of all, it's all kind of one camera setup. No laugh track or anything like that. So in that sense, it's not sitcom. It's also an hour-long episodes. It's much more of a kind of romantic comedy type of drama. It feels like Richard Curtis sort of nonsense,
Okay.
I guess something like Cold Feet or something like that,
Sort of a funny drama rather than a comedy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a weird setup, but again, it's sort of largely based in his own life. He, in his 40s, sort of found love, found his soulmate, and dating and romance and all that sort of stuff, but with comedy. It's whatever, right? It had a couple of series, and sure it did well. But yeah, that's about it, really, for David Remnick in terms of the things that have really hit off and been a success, I suppose. There have been several remakes of it in other languages.
Oh, really?
There's a German version, a Dutch version, and a Swedish version, I believe. They're, much the same kind of concept.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps more notably, there was an American remake.
Right.
It's this may give away who was playing the lead. Who do you think you would play the lead? It's made in 1995. It's a big name.
I'm actually thinking of Ed Asner in Up. Maybe not the unanimated version of Ed Asner.
Yeah, very good. Well, the show is called Cosby. So that may give it away slightly. So yeah, obviously it's Bill Cosby.
I can kind of see that. Obviously, Bill Cosby's reputation is different now, but
I think he was about 60 at the time. He's kind of right age for it. The Cosby Show had finished at that point. The woman playing his wife is the woman who played his wife in the Cosby Show. So obviously they've got good chemistry.
But different characters. It's not just Cliff Huxtable a few years older.
No, he's called something else. But obviously the show is just called Cosby. But that's not the character's name either. It's
they do that in America.
I know. It's just like, let's just name it after him. Anyway, I did watch the opening episode of it. It's just total banal American style sitcom, just nothing going on really.
What did they sort of make 341 episodes? In 6
96
months?
Episodes, yeah.
Yeah.
Over 5 years. But it was, they took the basic concept of 60-year-old man loses his job and is stuck at home and his wife has to deal with him.
Uh-huh.
Go. That's it. That's basically the only kind of, and he's a bit ornery, he just sort of gets argumentative with people.
Yes.
And that's it. And from what I could tell, it worked on the level it was trying to work on, but it was just, kind of had that banality that those shows have. Just not saying anything, not doing anything, just filling 24 minutes.
I was thinking to make tomorrow's dinner tonight and put it in the fridge for you.
Wait. I want you to do lasagna. Do lasagna for me, but you've been doing the lasagna wrong. You've been doing the noodles, the spinach, the meat, the cheese. I don't want it that way. I want the noodles, and then I want the cheese, the meat, and the spinach.
Okay, Hilton.
Yes.
Make your own dinner.
No, see, now you're getting an attitude about everything. I'm telling you, I like your cooking, but you're doing it wrong.
Probably doesn't get seen much these days.
Well, no, I guess that's not getting repeat fees, is it? Poor old, what was her name? Felicia something. Who played Cosby's wife.
Felicia Rashad, is that it?
That's it, yes, Felicia Rashad. She her, ongoing repeat fees must have dried up recently.
Damn.
I'd be surprised she's not trying to get out and work again.
One other thing. Just a funny little bit of legacy. Obviously, Richard Wilson became much more of a celebrity off the back of this show. And that apparently meant that someone went to him and said, "Do you want to do a dancer-size video for us?" And
shut up.
He agreed. There is, in 1996, he did a video called "Let's Dance" with Richard Wilson, and it's about dancing for exercise. I think kind of tailored to the older person. It's not too heavy going. It's quite.
I'm not going to do it again, but I find that hard to believe.
I've seen the clip from the opening of it, and it's just him stood there, and he's like wearing a shell suit, and he says, because he's ready to dance, he says, He says,
When they told me you can relieve stress, tension, keep fit and learn to dance, I thought, I don't believe it. So,
Oh, mate. I hope he got paid well for that. Oh, Richard.
oh,
I mean,
dear.
at least the Father Ted thing, you're poking fun at yourself. It's self-deprecating. Oh, dear God.
Before we close off, I do have a little quiz for you. It's not very well structured. It was just something that sort of
You know
came
that
up
I
as
always
was
get
watching
really
stuff.
cross with quizzes because I'm 44 and I can't remember anything. So you're going to ask me a question. I'm going to know the answer. I'm not going to be able to remember the answer. I'm going to get angry. Let's go.
Well, no, this is just... I'll try and sort of structure it like a quiz, but I wanted to mention that there's quite a lot of famous guest stars over the years, you know, comedians and comedy actors that drop in for an episode or two. So I'll try and sort of structure it as a quiz. Okay. So, which member of the Young Ones appears in the show twice, possibly 3 times, depending on how you define it?
Well, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to guess it's Chris Ryan because he was the only one who was really an actor.
Christopher Ryan is correct, although I will tell you that the other 3 members of the Young Ones all appeared in Jonathan Creek in multiple episodes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But Christopher Ryan does not appear in that, but he does appear in this. So he's in an early episode as like a plumber. You know, he's just doing his thing. And then several years later, he's in another episode, weirdly, playing like a handyman that's come to fix something, he's doing something. But he's playing identical twin brothers.
Oh, my God. And much hilarity did ensue.
Well, that's the thing. No hilarity ensues. And not just in the sense of they try something and it fails. They don't use the fact that they're identical and there's 2 of them. It just doesn't get used at all. I don't know why it's there at all. Odd writing occasionally. Okay, another one. Which member of the Goodies appears in One Foot in the Grave?
I know this one. I know this. This is Tim Brooke Taylor, who played the new neighbour in one of the... Was it in the last series? Did they replace Angus Deaton?
It's one of the specials before the last series. But yes, they're the new neighbours who move in. And then in the last series, because obviously he wasn't available or whatever, they just went, oh yeah, they moved away, someone else I know. So he didn't become a recurring character, they just did him for that one special. But yes, you're correct, Tim Brooke Taylor. Okay, 2 cast members of On the Buses appear. Any ideas? Could you even name anyone?
Not really, other than Reg Varney.
Well, Stephen Lewis, who is Blakey, he appears in an episode where they go down to visit some friends in a hotel. And Michael Robbins, who is Arthur in On the Buses, the brother-in-law character,
yeah.
He appears in it as like the guy delivering a skip or something, like he's just a tradesman. And then weirdly, in another episode in that same series, I heard his voice, and it's a person shouting out of a window and you don't see them, it's just a silhouette. But they must have just got him to record it while he was on set doing the other thing, because it's definitely his voice.
You recognise his voice?
Yeah. Okay, you'll get this. 2 stars of the film Quadrophenia. The 2 stars of the film Quadrophenia.
Well, the 2 people that come into my head are Phil Daniels and Sting, but I can't believe Sting was on Foot in the
No,
Grave.
not Sting. Phil Daniels, yes. Phil Daniels plays like a deranged criminal who's trying to kidnap Angus Deaton at one point.
Interesting. Good casting. I guess Leslie Ash?
No. Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Ray Winstone.
Ray Winstone was in One Foot in the Grave. I did not know that.
Yeah, just as a one-off episode. Again, he was another one who was doing a lot of jobbing acting around that time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he just popped up in for one episode as a criminal who was pretending to be a police officer.
God, I'd love to see Sting in One Foot in the Grave.
Okay, last question. 2 people who are probably most famous for being in Carry On films.
I'm going to guess Jim Dale.
No.
Oh. Give me is it a man or a woman, or is it one of each?
They're both women.
All right. Barbara Windsor?
Barbara Windsor is correct, yeah.
Whoa, that was a long shot.
She plays the role, and this was like pre-EastEnders. I think I heard someone talking about it, like she got the job on EastEnders while they were filming it, and she was like, oh, I'm not supposed to tell anyone yet, but I'm going to be on EastEnders. So like it was just pre her kind of renaissance.
Oh, I see.
And she plays someone who is a kind of a loose woman who is trying to seduce Victor, and Margaret has to go and read her the riot act. And the other woman is Joan Sims, who appears in the One Foot in the Algarve episode in a very odd appearance where they're on the plane and she's like in the seat next to Victor and she's another passenger. And Victor's really nervous about flying. He's apparently scared of flying. And she has a couple of lines. And then it cuts to them getting off the plane. It's over. I can only assume something has been cut out because, first of all, you don't get Joan Sims for that part. It was just a nothing part. And they did this whole big thing about Victor being afraid of flying that just goes nowhere.
That is becoming a bit of a theme, though, Alan.
You can't tell with David Renwick. Like, sometimes things just go nowhere.
Yeah. Let's get Joan Sims in here for this dead end.
You wouldn't have got her in. There must have been a deleted scene in there. Because, you know, she was in... That was about the time she would have been doing As Time Goes By as well. She kind of had a little semi-part in that, a regular part in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. There's some other big comedy names. Brian Murphy's in an episode. John Bird is in it, an episode. Peter Cook, of course, we've already mentioned.
Yes, yeah.
They had some big names in there along the times. But that's okay. They because they had so few kind of regular characters, it was very easy to just drop in a one-off episode. Someone's come in to do this, you know. So that's One Foot in the Grave.
Well, do you know, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that discussion. And I've enjoyed watching the episodes, and I think it does really hold up well for a 30-year-old sitcom.
I agree, yeah.
I think it's got that timeless quality. But I reflected on this earlier. I started this podcast saying the writing's really tight and, you know, the setups and the payoffs are all there.
Mm-hmm.
But I totally accept what you said about some of those setups and payoffs being there for no other reason than just to pay each other off.
Yeah.
And I think you're right about that idea of, you know, it's several subplots, several sketches just lumped together in a half hour. But the fact that it took this discussion for me to spot that suggests that it's well done. It's, you know, it's a jigsaw that's very well put together.
It does get away with it, and like I say, I think it's an extremely consistent show in terms of the level it works at and the comedy that it works at. I do think it gets a bit better as it goes along in terms of story structure. I think that's just David Renwick getting better at writing for this length. There's not much in terms of the characters finding their feet or anything like that, or them developing much over the years. I think they're pretty much set out as they are. And I think it works really nicely. A great comedy, a very precise writing, but in the way that works. Great acting, you know, very solid casting for the two main actors principally. I think you could replace Angus Deaton, for example. I think you could replace Owen Bremner, although I do think he does an excellent job for that part. But, you know, I think those two principal characters that carry the show, they've got chemistry together. They obviously play off each other as characters and as actors. It's great. And I think this is something that will still work in another 30 years, frankly. I don't think anything's going to change dramatically.
Yes, I agree.
You know, I have perhaps pulled at a few strings here and pointed out a few flaws, but ultimately it's a sitcom. I don't expect too much. I don't expect like narrative beauty, really. It's there to deliver some gags, and it does that.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to the British Sitcom History Podcast. You can find us on social media at BritComPod, and we will see you soon to talk about another sitcom.
Yes, more sitcoms coming.